Hi and welcome to the Metaphysical Anatomy channel, where we discuss psychosomatic root causes of psychological disorders and also ailments. So in this video, I will be covering the topic of miscarriage. Now, this is quite an extensive topic, so I do ask that if you have been challenged with a miscarriage or you know someone that has in the past and are still struggling to conceive, then I do invite you to watch this video to the very end. I do look forward to sharing this information with you, and also during this video, I will first address things that can increase your risk of miscarriage, and then we will be looking at going deeper into the medical ailments such as chromosome problems, womb and placenta problems, and as well as hormonal problems. And I will also briefly touch on the psychosomatic patterns and possible root causes as a result of these ailments. And from there on, we'll dive even deeper into the psychosomatic root causes of miscarriage. Now, not everything that I will share here will resonate with you, as I did do my best to cover a wide range of possibilities that could have led to a miscarriage. So I do invite you to take from this video what you feel resonates with you. And also please do keep in mind that during the video, when I refer to certain emotional stress factors, it can seem like a generalization. However, the aspects that I mention here are points where a person has reached their emotional threshold and their ability to emotionally and psychologically cope with stress. And it's reached to a point where the emotional stress has now started to surface as an ailment or a condition. Now, these conditions can also be a result of a strong predisposition that's been activated in the biology due to stress. So I want to talk more about the psychosomatic patterns and the possible causes behind miscarriage, as you might be wondering why some expectant mothers might have had the same challenges as you, however they didn't have a miscarriage. Now, an explanation that I have found so far is the same for most ailments that surface in a person's life, and that is that a person's threshold for enduring certain types of emotional and environmental stress has reached its peak, which made a person more overly sensitive to certain types of stress and environmental factors. And the expectant mother with a high threshold, for example, for these certain types of emotional stress or environmental stress will most likely have little to no biological reaction. However, it all depends on the person's predisposition and their threshold, and how well a person can process stressful circumstances in their life based on their biological resources and also emotional and physical resources. Now, here are a few points that can actually increase your risk of a miscarriage. An early miscarriage might actually happen for many reasons, but there are several general things that can also increase your risk, such as, for example, age. So women that's under the age of 30, 1 in 10 pregnancies actually tend to lead to a miscarriage. And women aged from 35 to 39 and up, there's almost 2 in 10 pregnancies that do fail. And women over 45, more than half of all pregnancies do not make it through to the end term. Now, infections also play a role. And medical conditions in a mother, for example, such as diabetes or thyroid disease, hormone problems, immune system responses, and also physical problems in the mother, and also uterine abnormalities. Now let's break this down even more into the phases of the trimesters when a miscarriage can take place including also what I would like to add here is the psychosomatic possible root causes from a metaphysical anatomy perspective, which includes research that I've done and discovered over the years as a result of working with my clients and students. Now let's start with the first trimester miscarriages, since the cause of most miscarriages are due to chromosomal abnormalities. Now, chromosomes are blocks of DNA, and they contain a detailed set of instructions that control a wide range of factors that can be anything from how the cells of the body develop to what your eye color, for example, would be. Now, sometimes something can go wrong at the point of conception, whereas the fetus receives perhaps too many or not enough chromosomes. And this could also be a result of a problem with either the egg or the sperm's chromosomes during an embryo formation, and also known as cell division stages. Now, medical reasons for this occurrence are often unclear, but it means that the fetus will not be able to develop normally, resulting in a miscarriage. Now, there have also been theories that the mother's immune system recognizes a defect or a problem in the baby's genes and actually ends the pregnancy. Now, also acknowledging that this doesn't necessarily always happen for all mothers. Now, if you look at the psychosomatic side to this from a metaphysical anatomy perspective, what I have found in my research is that if there's an immune interference, then it could be that emotionally, your fight or flight instinctive responses are in override, and you consciously or unconsciously may have experienced a great deal of stress. Now, side note, I say consciously or unconsciously, as even though you might actually not be consciously experiencing stress, your body's instinctive responses and sensors can still feel and respond to environment that is stressful. Now, getting back on track, if you experience a great deal of stress that resulted in you feeling under attack, whether you verbally or physically felt that, these deep yet strong underlying emotions can be a result of your present circumstances, or as a result from your past that has not been emotionally or psychologically resolved. Now, in most cases, I have found that this ripple effect is an end result of past stress that has not been resolved, as the body is still in a state of shock or distress. Now, it also depends on your threshold for experiencing stress, and that would also allow you to either be consciously aware of the stress or not. Now, the stress could also have been repeated to the extent where you have become numb to it, which in metaphysical anatomy means dissociated. And then you become numb as a way of coping with the stressful circumstances, whether it's as a result of your current or past situations. Now, it's been estimated that up to 2/3 of early miscarriages are associated with chromosome abnormalities. Now, this is very unlikely to reoccur and doesn't mean that there's always going to be a problem with the mother or the father's chromosomes. So if this has happened to you, for example, in the past, it does not necessarily mean that it will happen again. Now, the emotional state of the mother and the father at the time of conception can play a tremendous role, and the emotional stress that is felt during the womb in the womb's environment, also just after fertilization, as the cell division takes place. Now, there has been a lot of discussion and research done globally about the conscious state of the mother and the father during conception. And when I refer to conscious state, it does not just necessarily mean how spiritually aware they are, but it also implies their emotional state at the time of the conception. Now, for example, I've had many clients who've had a miscarriage, and when I asked them how they were emotionally feeling toward their partner at the time of conception, an overwhelmingly large portion of them actually reported that they felt anger, they felt frustrated, or that they had a great deal of unresolved challenges with their partner. Now, it almost seems that the mother's body was rejecting the development of the fetus, or the fetus rejected the environment, as the emotional foundation with which the fetus was conceived with was not ideal in order for it to properly develop. So let's move on to the placental problems. Now, the placenta is the organ linking the mother's blood supply to her baby. And if there's a problem with the development of the placenta, then it can also lead to a miscarriage. Now, when you look at the psychosomatic aspects relating to the placenta, it relates to nurturing and protection. And I found that many women who have been challenged with placenta difficulties, also during their pregnancy, had a strenuous and very difficult relationship with their mother, especially during the time when the current pregnant mother was in the womb with her mother. Now, often there were strong emotions of rejection or resentment, as perhaps the client's mother experienced feelings of fear or uncertainty. Now, this resulted in stress and pressure that affected the bonding phase between the mother and the child. And I've also noticed in my research for many years that the placenta is not a barrier between the mother and the child. And recently I found research to actually back up my findings. So scientists have now also found that after around the 17-week stage where the fetal development is taking place, the fetus can already start to feel and be affected by the mother's emotional state and trauma that she experiences. So this could also explain that if the mother felt resentful or rejection towards the child, that the emotions can be so strong that it can have an effect on the development of the fetus, and the fetus feeling rejected by the mother's physical body. Now, the strong emotions toward the fetus can also potentially cause the fetus to feel that its environment is toxic and unsupportive for its development. And this can also have a ripple effect to many areas that are connected to the fetus, which could include, for example, the amniotic fluid and the umbilical cord. Now, emotions can also be held and programmed into water, and our bodies are also made of 70% water, which speaks volumes when you look at it from this perspective. Now, remember that in this instance, we are still talking about the pregnant mother or the person who had the miscarriage that was in the mother's womb. Now, this unconscious programming and the emotional memory that has been held in her body as a result of trauma transfer from her mother to her can potentially be activated when she falls pregnant. And it reminds her body of the emotional predisposition that was felt during her development phases, which could affect her cellular memory and also how her biological body responds to her current baby in the womb. Now, I have also come to learn that if a mother experiences a great deal of shock, that it can have a big impact on the development of the placenta. For example, I had a client once who was 6 months pregnant and she was extremely close to her mother, and her mother had a heart attack. However, she recovered from the incident, but the moment that the client found out that the mother had a heart attack, she felt her entire womb area spasm and it started to cramp. And she went to the doctor and found that she had a miscarriage at 6 months of pregnancy. And when I talked to her about this, I asked her what went through her mind when she heard the news of her mother being in hospital. And without hesitation, she immediately said that I felt that I had to be there for her and my time and energy could not be distracted from helping my mother. She needed me more than anything else. So the client even went as far as to say that she felt that in that moment, the pregnancy in the child felt like a burden to her and her mother became her priority. Even though she didn't mean what she said in the sense that she was willing to lose her child, but her body reacted so strongly to the news of her mother being in a life and death situation and felt that her mother would need her to take care of her during her recovery, that her body was already exhausted from being pregnant and working very long hours, that on a biological level, her body was almost rejecting the baby in an attempt to reserve her energy in order to deal with the new onset of challenges that she was about to face with her mother's new medical condition. Now, issues with the placenta could also relate to a mother who has self-destructive patterns, such as self-loathing or rejecting herself in the sense that she is not prioritizing her needs and health. And the underlying reason for this could be one of many. But just to name a few, that she could have had a negative association with self-care, such as having to be made feel guilty or shameful for attending to her needs as a child, or always having to prioritize other people's needs first. And this can also be evident in, for example, not eating well and not taking care of her physical body, which can affect the placenta's ability to develop and nurture itself in order to function and provide everything that the fetus needs. Now, the mother could also have been under a great deal of stress and might have adapted to a destructive coping mechanism such as alcohol, excessive smoking, and bad diet, just to name a few. Now, let's move to the second trimester of miscarriages. Now, long-term health conditions that the mother has can also play a very big role in miscarriages. And I will also go through the common medical challenges and briefly also share the psychosomatic possible root causes of these challenges. Now, if you would like to learn more about this ailment and the psychosomatic patterns associated with them, then I would also highly recommend my book Metaphysical Anatomy Volume 1, which covers 679 medical conditions, and it also explains the psychosomatic root causes of these ailments, and it would also give you a starting point to assist you in addressing these challenges. Now, also just a reminder that when I refer to certain emotional stress factors here in these points that will follow, it's relevant in these cases as the body's threshold and ability to process the stress has reached its limit. And parts of that I'm going to be pointing out here are the most dominant emotional stress factors. So now let's move on to the ailments that pregnant mothers can be challenged by. So diabetes is a very common problem if it's not controlled properly. And it's also a very common medical condition. And this would normally relate to a time period in a person's life that has suppressed her joy, and she's numbed herself to a life that she no longer trusts, that good things in life could still be experienced in a safe way. And then we also have severe high blood pressure, which will also relate to unresolved anger that resulted from circumstances that made the mother feel powerless and a great deal of injustice. Yet she is not expressing these deep-seated emotions and often continues to stay in stressful circumstances or around people that are greatly contributing to her emotional stress. Now, lupus is also another factor, and in this instance, I have found that the mother had a great deal of trauma and stress associated with her father or with masculine figures, which resulted in her having poor to almost no personal boundaries with men. And they tend to have a pattern of attracting abusive male figures in their life, or as I would say, toxic relationships and dynamics with men, which could also cause and create a circumstance and environment where the mother could feel unsafe to raise a child with the man because the core underlying factor there is lack of trust. And then we also have kidney disease, which can relate to a strong and deep resentment that has not been expressed, as the mother is trying to keep the peace in her life and would rather emotionally suffer than express how she feels. And normally with kidney disease, you would also be exploring strong predispositions of very recent ancestral sexual trauma in the maternal side of the DNA lineage. And often this ailment also relates to an incident that took place that left the mother feeling a great deal of injustice or violation of boundaries. yet no action was taken to resolve and correct the incident that took place in her past. And then you also have an overactive thyroid gland, which would mean that the mother feels out of control in her life, or that this could also relate to her past. However, the emotional consequences of having felt extremely out of control emotions is still present, as her body is still acting and reacting as if though it has lost control of its environment, and also ability to feel physically and psychologically safe. And her past experiences within her family or relationship dynamics made her feel powerless, as though she had to fight for what she wanted and needed. And then we also have an underactive thyroid gland. And this condition psychosomatically can also be related to pressure from the outside influences that push the mother to do more and accomplish more than others. However, instead of feeling motivated by this, as I would call it reverse psychology, only left her feeling overwhelmed and strung out by too much pressure. And she often felt that what was expected of her was unattainable, leaving her feeling that it's easier to give up rather than face failure and disappointment. And this also could relate to her mother, having felt a great deal of stress during the pregnancy with the current mother. Now let's also look at infections, as it also has a big impact on a woman's health, increasing the possibility of miscarriage. So now let's start with bacterial vaginosis. Now this can also be a result of feeling resentful towards a sexual partner as a result of perhaps old and suppressed sexual abuse or feeling sexually disrespected. Now, these incidents could also have taken place in a mother's lifetime, such as a sexual act or interaction that could have triggered a strong sexual shame or sexually offensive encounter that has been stored in the DNA lineage, meaning the emotional stress has been experienced by her recent ancestors, and the memory of this trauma has been activated. And it could also be a result of feeling resentful towards the opposite sex for not feeling good enough and not feeling desired enough, which ultimately is a reflection of how she feels and sees herself, which is normally a direct result of how she was treated by masculine figures in her life. Now, this condition can also often strongly relate to feelings of deep regret, where perhaps actions were taken in the past that negatively influence her self-esteem as well as her sexuality, which in this case resulted in guilt and shame associated with certain sexual acts and also her sexuality towards men. Another factor also is chlamydia. Now, if a woman has this condition and she had a miscarriage, it would be a strong indication for her to really evaluate as to why she wants to have the child. Because at this point in time, she is challenged with a destructive relationship with herself and needs to attend to the root causes of it in order for it to be resolved. Unconsciously, she might be trying to have a child in order to resolve the missing links that she feels within herself. And she feels worthless if she does not become a mother. Now, this feeling can also be incredibly strong if the mother consciously does not want to be a mother figure. Now, the next topic is food poisoning. And food poisoning is unfortunately a lot more common than what we realize. And here it's important to look at what new environment is feeling toxic to you or unhealthy, or have an unhealthy association that you have with it, with either even with love or support that you're receiving from your environment. Yet there's also conflict between wanting and needing it, but also rejecting it at the same time because of unhealthy associations that were made with these positive emotional needs that you have. Now, this is showing you that it's time for you to reevaluate what true support really looks like and what it should feel like to you. And also what love really means to you and what your true definition of that is. Because there are people and circumstances in your life that are not reflecting your true values associated with love and support. Now, also taking medication. Now, medication also plays a big role in miscarriages, especially pain medication or medication for inflammation. And if that was the case, then it would be showing and telling you that the psychosomatic aspects behind this would be of a great deal of anger that's not being expressed. Physical pain is often an end result of unresolved anger, which is then also again a result of either feeling powerless or a great sense of injustice that was not resolved or dealt with in an effective and healthy way in order for you to let it go. Now, it's important to also look at, for example, if you did use pain medication, where in your physical body did you experience the pain? The location where the pain is felt will also already tell you the story of what the suppressed messages are that are being held there that is not being dealt with. And once again, Metaphysical Anatomy Volume 1 is a really great resource for finding the exact location in the body and what the hidden messages that are being held there. Now, let's look at the womb structure. Now, the womb represents the housing, as I would call it, around the fetus, and that is the fetus's protection bubble. If the womb is challenged in any way, then that would tell me that the mother is feeling very unsupported by her family or by her environment. And her ability to also feel safe and to feel protected has been challenged as well. Now, it could be that her foundation has been shaken by having relationship problems with the father of the child, or it could mean that she feels an absence of the child's father. Now, if there are womb problems and it's a result of non-cancerous growths in the womb, such as fibroids, it could either mean psychosomatically that the mother is feeling a great deal of resentment towards the father of the child, or she's feeling resentment perhaps towards her mother for not being the kind of mother that she wanted her or needed her to be. It could also be that there's a great deal of regret towards how she reacted and behaved towards her mother, and/or an estranging relationship with men. And she might also fear becoming a mother, as she doesn't feel good enough to be a mother, or has a fear of becoming like her mother. Now, it's time for her to step into her true authentic power as a woman without needing anyone's permission in order to become the feminine version that resonates with her. Now, an abnormally shaped womb can also be a cause of a miscarriage, and here I would be looking at perhaps a deep-seated feeling of inadequacy, also to becoming a mother. And I understand that many people who have become mothers feel inadequate. However, when you look at the psychosomatic patterns of these issues, we look at where the most dominant stress is located. And what I found in my research is that with an abnormally shaped womb, there's also a tremendous amount of stress and emphasis being energized on feeling inadequate as a mom. Now, not feeling that she has perhaps even the right support around her also in order to raise a child, or that she is very mistrusting of the support that is available. And her own upbringing could have been stressful, and often in this case, I would be looking at a dysfunctional family dynamics at least 3 generations ago that is now coming to the surface. And now when we look at a weakened cervix, in some cases the muscles of the cervix, either at the neck of the womb, are weaker than usual. And this is also known as a weakened cervix. And this could be a result of an injury or as a result of surgery. Now, if that was the case, then it's important to explore why the mother needed the surgery in the first place, as it will clearly indicate what the psychosomatic issues are that needs to be addressed. Now, in this case, I learned that there's a great deal of stress related to lack of feminine support and guidance and mentorship. Now, at times, feminine support is not trusted, and there's a strong betrayal traumas and patterns. She also feels powerless and vulnerable as a woman as a result of possible past trauma or a strong predisposition that was triggered from her ancestry. Now, this condition is also showing her to create a strong foundation for her to stand on and to grow from. And it's time for her to regain her sense of power and strength as a woman, and to reclaim that without having to overcompensate for her newfound boundaries once she steps back into her power. Polycystic ovary syndromes, also known as PCOS. This is also a condition where the ovaries are larger than normal, and this can also be caused by hormonal changes in the ovaries. Now, this condition is showing a mother that her environment and upbringing was very aggressive, and that aggressiveness and hostility is now being reflected within herself, as well as her femininity. And she has relied too much on her masculinity in order to stay strong during stressful times, especially in the presence of a masculine figure. And her masculine approach, which can also come across as the fighting instinctive response, also shows up and shows that her being emotionally very sensitive and defensive. And she also has a hard side to her, which can often be felt or seen as a masculine side, and somewhere along the way it has started to serve her on her more, rather than actually her feminine side serving her. And when she did feel feminine, she was perhaps abused and felt vulnerable, and these feminine qualities can now be associated with a weakness. And the mother is going through a time and a phase in her life where she can now realize that she can have her needs met without having to fight for it. And it's also a time to realize and let go of the pain associated with these beautiful positive needs and feminine qualities that she wants and needs. And now that we've covered most of the ailments related to miscarriages, I want to talk a little bit more about the psychosomatic patterns and environmental stress, and also relationship stress behind miscarriages. Because as I said earlier in the video, some expected mothers who had certain challenges who didn't have a miscarriage, and then others who had the exact same health challenges did have a miscarriage. Now, I've had many mothers report to me that after a miscarriage, they could feel that the soul of their baby is around them. And very often in dreams, the soul would come forward and talk to the mother, explaining that on a soul level, they both agreed to have this experience in life. The mother also had the experience in order to show her something about her life. Did she want the child for all the right reasons? What did the pregnancy give her emotionally, and what did it also attract into her life that she felt that she couldn't have or feel or attract without the pregnancy? And oftentimes a soul temporarily comes into life form to help reveal something to the expectant mother or the father of the child. Now, in many cases, a child could have coming to show a person that they are not ready to start a family, as they have unresolved issues in their life that needs to be resolved in order for them to emotionally and spiritually grow. And I've also had clients who had unresolved trauma and stress with their mother and psychologically held them back from becoming a mother. And once it was resolved, the client was actually able to successfully conceive and deliver a healthy baby. Now, there have been incidents where I worked with women who were married to men who were abusive psychologically and or physically. Now, consciously, the woman wanted to have a child to either save the marriage or to fill an emotional void in her life as a result of her marriage being unfulfilling, or to help her to feel that she has a purpose in life. And once I had a client who also desperately wanted to have a child, but she was single and she considered having a child. And I asked her, would you still want the child if you met a man that was compatible to you? And she looked at me and paused, and with her eyes filled up with tears, she actually said no. She realized then and there that she wanted to have a child for all the wrong reasons. There are also situations where I work with women who had a strong maternal instinct to become a mother, that they would do anything to fulfill their biological need. However, emotionally and psychologically, they were not ready, but their body was pushing them to have a child. And they experienced a miscarriage after miscarriage, as they had a block to becoming a mother as a result of trauma that they experienced with their mother, for example. Now, their unconscious mind was sabotaging their body's ability to nurture and hold a baby for the full 9 months, as there was an unconscious fear of them becoming like their mother. I also once had a client who continued to have multiple miscarriages, and once we explored her circumstances, I learned that her ancestry and her husband's recent ancestry were actually in conflict with one another during the war. And it was almost as if though her physical body could feel the unresolved conflict both within their DNA lineages. And they also argued a lot for no apparent reason. And yet they were always irritated with one another, but their love for each other was strong to work through their arguments. And once the emotional soul conflict from the ancestral history was resolved, she finally conceived the child and gave birth. Now, I have seen many cases where women did want a child but continued to have miscarriages, as they were also sexually abused. And unconsciously, they didn't want to have a child as and feel the responsibility that they would always have to protect that child to not experience the same psychological and emotional stress that they went through in their life. Another aspect could also be that the timing for one of the partners might have been right, and the other partner had a resistance to having a child, however failed to communicate it. And it could also be a resistance that is deeply suppressed, and there's an unintentional biological sabotage taking place as the body is responding to the resistance. So if this is your case, then ask yourself, what in your life will change that you're not ready to change if you did become a parent? Often it could also be that one of the partners are already very overwhelmed with stress in their life, and they have a lot of burdens and a lot of responsibilities, and having a child would tremendously increase their stress and their emotional and physical ability to cope with their life. And in many cases, there's also a deep-seated fear of not being able to financially provide for a family. And it also doesn't necessarily have to be financial stress. It could be any kind of stress that would cause the body to feel a sense of deprivation. And biologically speaking, the body is shutting down. Deep down, the body goes into survival mode, as it does not have the necessary energetic or emotional psychological resources in order to cope and maintain its current circumstances. And having a child would completely change the dynamic of that and add a burden to it. So ultimately what it boils down to is that the body is just saying, we need to look at something deeper before we take the next step. So thank you so much for joining me here, and until next time, be the light that you are.